Hello and welcome to an American Talk Show. I'm your host, David Allard. I'm an attorney in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. We have a very important show for you today. It's called Agenda 21. We have a couple of guests to talk with us. Have you introduced yourselves? Kenny?
My name is Kenneth Caraba. I am also from Fitchburg, Mass, USA-born resident, and I am 44 years old.
And Hal?
Hal Allard, and I'm a Massachusetts resident, and I'm a software developer. I've developed software for over 20 years.
Okay, thank you very much. This particular topic, Agenda 21, is a very important topic. Agenda 21 is a treaty that was signed in 1992 by 179 nations. Then President George Bush signed it. It was also called the Rio Accords, and a plan to implement what's called sustainable development. And although the treaty was signed by George Bush, and the following year, Bill Clinton created the President's Council on Sustainable Development through executive order. And even today, this is being implemented. A very important thing to know about this Agenda 21 is that it was never approved by Congress. Under the Constitution, Congress has to approve any treaties signed by the President of the United States. The President can sign them, but they're not law until Congress approves by a 2/3 vote. That was not done. So Agenda 21 is not the law. However, it is being implemented by executive order. Executive order is contravening the Constitution, which is required, which requires a consent of Congress. So, by executive order, Agenda 21 is being implemented in cities and towns in the United States, and there are a lot of bad aspects to Agenda 21, and people don't really know what Agenda 21 is about. Agenda 21 is called a Plan for Sustainable Development, and it calls for the government, by extension, it calls for governmental control, but actually international control of land and natural resources, food, water, energy in our nation. The document is 300 pages long, which I've gone through piece by piece, and I would encourage all the viewers to Google the document. Look up the document, because from time to time I'm going to give you sections where you can actually look it up yourself and see this is what they're saying in the agenda. This is what they're looking to implement in this country. I think it's a disaster for this country, and I think that people should be aware of it. It's a very lengthy topic, Agenda 21, but I think we can sum it up by a statement made in 1976 in the United Nations document, the Vancouver Declaration on Human Settlements and the Vancouver Action Plan. And a quote from that document says the following: "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice." And if you look at Agenda 21, Section 7.2a, it says the objective is to provide for the land requirements of human settlement development through environmentally sound physical planning and land use so as to ensure access to land to all households and, where appropriate, the encouragement of communally and collectively owned and managed land. This Agenda 21 is a socialist agenda, and it's worse than that. But it is infiltrating our cities and towns, and it's done very insidiously. It's done through programs like land management programs, like the UNDP, the FAO, and also encompasses the World Bank. There's a lot of aspects to this plan. Like, for example, section 7.29 says the national government will do an inventory of all its land to establish a land information system in which to classify it for its appropriate uses. So the national government is to do an inventory of all the land and then determine what its uses will be. And that would have to be approved on an international level. So it gets very complicated, but let's give you a specific example. There has been in this country a move from the cities to the suburbs. The people have gotten jobs in the cities, they drive their cars on the highway, they go and live in the suburbs. That's the way the cities are pretty much at this time. Agenda 21 wants to reverse that. It wants to force people back into the cities. It wants the suburbs to be declared wild areas, unbuildable areas. It wants the highways to be actually ripped up and to be replaced by trains. And it's using this technique. They will be able to compact people in the cities. And in fact, they have a program in New York called Stack and Pack. In the Stack and Pack program, Mayor Bloomberg has actually built thousands of small unit apartments. These units are between 225 square feet to 300 square feet apartments. Very small apartments. And they would have normally violate housing code, would not be appropriate living standards. But thousands have been built, and people are to live in these, and not in the areas outside of the cities. So, keeping that in mind, Hal, have you done any research with regard to stack and packs, or the how do you feel about the idea of them forcing people to live in the cities?
Well, I think it's another form of communism. Right now, America is supposed to be the land of the free, and now they're going to tell everybody what they're saying is we're reclaiming the earth. That's the Agenda 21, is to reclaim the earth and take away the rights to people's lands, what people can do with their land. It just dig in deeper and deeper through the EPA. One thing I wanted to bring up about the executive orders, which people should be aware of, is Executive Order 13575. President Obama signed it in June of 2011, giving each federal agency authority over the food, fiber, and energy for all of rural America, or 16% of the U.S. Control of the resources is a key requirement of sustainable development, as it enables the governing authority the power to manage their usage more efficiently than individuals and communities. So they are really cracking down on this agenda, and what they do is they'll hide the agenda in healthcare bills to push it through, because people are afraid of Agenda 21, some people, so they'll try to push this stuff through the Obamacare.
And getting back to that section, it's 7.19 where they talk about the countries all should concentrate on facilitating the transition from rural to urban lifestyles. So they want to get everybody out of the country and back into the city. And what you mentioned is very scary indeed. And I'd like to point out Agenda 21 Rule 7.14. Agenda 21 has determined that we need to get rid of counties and city political boundaries because it may hinder the implementation of a comprehensive environmental program. The UN wants to create regions in the United States, which it's already doing, which control natural resources, and these the regional governors are not elected officials. And just so people can check at home, 7.14, it says some metropolitan areas extend over the boundaries of several political and or administrative entities, counties and municipalities, even though they conform to a continuous urban system. In many cases, this political heterogeneity hinders the implementation of comprehensive environmental and management programs. So what does that mean to you, Hal? What kind of outlook are we going to have if they get rid of boundaries, such as political boundaries, such as Worcester County, if they get rid of cities? First of all, under what authority does the United Nations get rid of our boundaries? And why would the United States want to sign a treaty which would allow the UN to step in and manage our land and manage our resources and even eliminate our political boundaries?
Well, I think some of that is financial. I think that if they control all the resources, they control the people. But a lot of it is a financial thing. For instance, if they control the amount of cows you have, or they can put taxes on cows, like this. The EPA issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in preparation to regulate automobile greenhouse gas emissions under the Clear Air Act. The regulations of automobiles emissions automatically initiates other provisions of the CAA. One of these provisions requires permits for anyone who emits more than 100 tons of regulated pollutant per year, and there are millions of sources that emit more than 100 tons of carbon. But what's interesting is how they fit in cows and pigs. They say the U.S. Department of Agriculture says that a producer with more than 25 dairy cows, 50 beef cattle, or 200 hogs would emit more than 100 tons of carbon and be subjected to permitting requirements. So they say these thresholds would impact 99% of the dairy producers, over 90% of the beef producers, and 95% of the hog producers in the United States. So a lot of this is an agenda to control food and agriculture and profit from it.
I agree, but just to be clear to the people out there, this Agenda 21 is sold as an environmental fix-it. It's sold as a way to not only actually fix the environment and to make the planet so-called sustainable, but Agenda 21 says that it's their intent to balance the inequities in the world by putting limitations on land use. So by in that section 4.3 to 4.5, and I'll read you that portion. It says the major cause of continued deterioration of the global environment is the unsustainable pattern of consumption and production, particularly in the industrialized countries such as us, which is a matter of grave concern, aggravating poverty and imbalances. 4.4 says measures to be undertaken at the international level. This is the international level now. For the protection and enhancement of the environment must take fully into account the current imbalances in the global patterns of consumption and production. 4.5 says special attention should be paid to demand for natural resources generated by unsustainable consumption and to the efficient use of those resources consistent with the goal of minimizing depletion and reducing pollution. Although consumption patterns are very high in certain parts of the world, the basic consumer needs of a large section of humanity are not being met. This results in excessive demands and unsustainable lifestyles among the richer segments, which places immense stress on the environment. Here the UN is telling us our lifestyles are not sustainable, and therefore the wealthier nations are putting stress on the environment. And they are going to use their laws imposed upon us so that we give up our opportunity to use our natural resources. The only difference between our country and Afghanistan is because we're able to use natural resources. Afghanistan has none. That's why they grow poppies. We have natural resources which helped us become a wealthy and powerful nation. And this plan will change all of that. What would you say about that?
Well, it's interesting is the EPA is going with this cap and trade, and Obama's really pushing with cap and trade. So the EPA will have power to force many homeowners to virtually rebuild their homes to meet stringent environmental requirements before they can sell them. Living in a house that does not meet the EPA's green regulations for roofing, windows, doors, insulation, or heating and cooling systems will be slapped with fines. And what's interesting is, even living here out in this association, we got a letter from the town, and they said that your septic system and all your has to be up to code if you live so many feet within a lake. And it's ridiculous how they're so into what's going on with my septic system.
Right. And Kenny, what would you say about all of this?
I think these agendas are things they're trying to pass to turn the whole country and the whole world into a one world government. I'm going to read from a website, www.conservativeactionalerts.com, and this website warns you about the major problems of Agenda 21. It begins and talks about, like I said, they're trying to turn the world into a one globe, one world government. And they've already actually have accomplished passing some of these into towns. Some towns in America have some of these agendas passed. Things like what kind of car you can drive, where you can work, where you can travel, which you mentioned earlier, where you can live. These are all decisions that are going to be based on Agenda 21. And the main reason this is going to be a problem for Americans is because slowly but surely these are being passed. And the reason why you wouldn't be able to figure out what was happening and stopping it is because by the time you find out, it's going to be too late.
And it's true. And what's interesting is the insidious way that it's done. An international council organization will contract with cities and towns and take over the land and the resources and the usages of that area. And the other problem is, besides the fact that they sell this as an environmental thing, is they convince people that if they don't go along with it, that they are not operating in the interests of the country. They're not operating in the interests of the environment, and they're not protecting the future generations. But in reality, what they're doing is very dangerous to future generations, because future generations are going to be living in stacking packs. They won't have a modular house with a 1 acre backyard in a suburb. They'll be living in a city, in a housing unit. The suburbs will be untouchable. They could perhaps go visit, but they couldn't have a country lifestyle. And so when they try to sell this to the public as environmentally friendly, the public has to keep in mind that their goal ultimately is to consolidate and compact the population into, and this stuff is not hidden. Anyone can look it up, and I encourage them to do it. They can look it up online, read Agenda 21. It's 300 pages long plus. I've read it. I know exactly what they're doing. I know exactly what they're saying. And they are selling it as a plan to help people and help the environment. But even their own words say that it's really a way of redistributing the wealth. And I think what really bothers me is how our country can support this and try to be bound to this. And it seems very much like an international takeover of our country. And I think that something has to be done, and the people have to be able to recognize it. And they won't always go by the same name, but you'll always hear the idea that we have to preserve the environment. And how is it, Hal, that the president doesn't have a conflict of interest? He was the first president to sit in the UN Security Council. First president, he chaired the UN Security Council in 2009. How is it he doesn't have a conflict of interest with a document like this?
Obviously, it seems like he has his own agenda based upon the UN. So it's not only the United States of America, it's what the UN wants, and where that fits into a one-world government. The way this goes out, especially with the founder of ICLEI, is it's a national association, and it's going out to the whole world. It's not just the United States. It's a world plan to control the population.
And they do it by using the word sustainable. What is sustainable? What is good for the environment? And whatever they want to deem on their websites, and they have several of them. I think UNEP is one of them, where they consider what things are sustainable and what things are not sustainable. And you would be very surprised at the things that they say are not sustainable. Things like pastures, golf courses, scuba diving, ski runs, grazing livestock, floor and wall tiles, aquaculture, fisheries, farmlands, rangelands. The Global Biodiversity Assessment, and it is UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, calls for urgent action to reverse the effects of unsustainable human activities on the globe, such as those. And in many of their documents, they say the Western lifestyle is not sustainable. We can't live like this anymore. Kenny, what do you say about that?
I just don't know where they get their information, because most people would never agree with this. And the fact that you were talking about what bothered you the most, what bothers me the most is once again, with this website, conservativeactionalerts.com, in 1992 conference, President or former U.S. President Bill Clinton established the UN's own sustainable development in 1995, meaning they did not go to Congress to try to get this approved. They were basically trying to make up things on their own to say that it was right, and no one else had a right to say they were wrong, which means that you and I do not get an opportunity to reject or support their ideas as citizens of the world. That's communism.
I think you're right about it. And in the way that they can do this takeover is just like we read before. They can get rid of the political boundaries and the powers of the cities and towns, and they control the areas through regions. And these regions are not elected people. And these regionals, a good example, the National Association of Regional Councils, or NARC. And it serves as the voice of regionalism through effective interaction with officials. And they do their regional planning, and they're not voted in. And they also have Council of Governments and a Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO. And this is like a shadow government. It's unelected officials taking over natural resources, your water, your land, your energy, all of it controlled through regional governors, not elected officials. And what do you see as a problem with that, Hal?
Well, based upon the region, what's interesting is that there's more organizations that Obama's giving powers to. One is the EPA and the other is HUD. So, I mean, in March 2012, Obama signed this EO giving HUD the authority to engage in city, community, and regional planning to augment their vision for sustainability, for stability and economic growth. HUD now has the ability to create regulations to enforce that local and regional planning the government feels is beneficial, whatever the government feels is beneficial to the fiscal stability of the United States. That's Executive Order 13602. So it's not as like we have enough regulations upon us already, but now we have to put up with more and more regulations. It's just the point where it's absolutely ridiculous the way that Americans are being regulated now.
I see it as social engineering. I see it as they're creating a different form of existence. And it actually resembles the serfs of old, where you have the landowner, the king, and everyone lives at the king's bidding in a limited area, or rents an area, doesn't own anything, can't farm. This happened in England. This is in England that you couldn't shoot or hunt a deer because the deer all belonged to the king. You couldn't fish because the fish belonged to the king. And even today, the swans in England belong to the queen. So it just goes to show you that it's going back to an area where the people and the power of the people are being limited, and they're not going to be allowed to own anything because it won't be sustainable if they own something. And if anything, humans are a hindrance. And this is certainly going many steps back in terms of our individual liberties and powers. And speaking about regions, in San Francisco they have something called the San Francisco One Bay Area Project. This is a project which is a 20-year project, and the government is spending $250 billion to implement. Under this One Bay Area project, there will be 680,000 housing units built, all of them within a half a mile of El Camino Ave. I guess it's called El Camino Ave. And
similar to what they did in New York.
Similar to what they did in New York, exactly. But with this project, no other houses are allowed to be built. 680,000 units will be built within a half a mile of El Camino Ave, and then El Camino Ave will be non-drivable. That will be turned into public transport. So again, all the housing, this is a project underway now. Despite widespread opposition to it, this is actually happening. They are building it. People will not be able to have a house in the suburbs. They'll be living in housing units, and these are all multi-family housing units.
This is something Agenda 21 has already put into
implemented.
motion?
Yes, it's already there. People can Google it. And the people will be forced to live in this multi-family houses, buildings. They're all multi-family, and they will take the train to work. And this is the future of this country. And anybody who thinks, and they talk about overpopulation's a problem. They push that, and they've convinced the public that overpopulation is a problem. and they cite this in several of their sections. Overpopulation in the world is not a problem. And they said, well, there'll be 8 billion people. Here it says right here, there'll be 8 billion people by the year 2020. So what? You could take the entire population of the world today, double it, and put it all in Jacksonville, Florida. There's not an overpopulation problem. If anybody were to get into their car and drive from the East Coast to the West Coast, there will be sections that you will drive for hours and hours and hours and hours and not see a telephone pole,
Well, anywhere
or a
in the world.
house, nothing. But they're selling it as an overpopulation problem. And people believe it is because even under their own documents, 65% of the populace lives on the coast. Why do they live on the coast? Why is New York the #1 populated city in the world? Why is it? Everybody immigrated there. They all stayed there. The majority stayed there and reproduced there and didn't leave. So
Right.
these cities, but they're forcing people back into the cities. They don't want them in the suburbs, despite the fact there is a huge volume of unused land in the middle of the country. Hal, what do you think of that?
Well, it's just absolutely absurd. This government is just raining down on the American people. So I don't know. I do know though that there's people fighting back in regards to this. Like Oklahoma passed a bill prohibiting the UN's Agenda 21. Oklahoma passed a bill that nullified Obamacare. It prohibited any official from imposing federal mandates associated with Obamacare inside the state of Oklahoma. It's a grassroots pressure. The majority of Oklahoma State House voted to pass the measure, which aims to protect residents' private property rights. So I think at a state level, if the states can shut down the federal government, I think that there's a chance that we could push back.
That was the only encouraging thing I've heard about this. Is I heard the state of Alabama rejected it. So I think you're right. I think some states are pushing back, but the only problem I see, or one of the problems I see, is that nobody's trying to get this done through Congress. Nobody's trying to push it through Congress. They're just implementing it by executive order. They're just going ahead with it.
And what that shows is, it's in the article I read, some people wonder how a global body like Agenda 21 could overrule your rights as an American, and it's because they believe that they can do this because they do not respect your human rights. That's basically what they're doing. They don't respect any human rights that you have. They feel that they have a right to decide this for you. That's what this comes down to.
Well, I think that Americans are more and more just being ignored. A good example would be the bailouts. Is who do you know wanted a bailout, and they did it anyway. Right?
98% of the people did not want the bailout.
Right, and they implement it anyway. So at this point, it's they'll do whatever they feel is necessary. Just like Obama gave permission to HUD to do whatever they think is necessary, whatever the government feels is beneficial to the stability of the United States. Not what the people think is beneficial, but whatever the government feels is beneficial to the United States. And that says it right there. Who's controlling who? Are the people controlling the government, or is the government controlling the people? It seems like the federal government is they're sticking in like a tick,
They're not answering to anybody. And in fact, our own tax dollars are being used against us in these projects. That $250 billion goes into that San Francisco Bay Area project. Mm-hmm. Our own money is to use to house us like chickens. And by the way, who are the great environmentalists who are proposing this agenda? Well, billionaires such as Maurice Strong, Al Gore, Mikhail Gorbachev, George Soros, Rockefeller, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Joyce Foundation. Are these people going to be living in a stack and pack in New York or San Francisco?
Definitely not.
So why do they propose that for us?
It's a good point. Why would they propose something that they wouldn't do for themselves?
Well, they don't even follow the healthcare regulations they make the Americans do. They're like, well, we're exempt from that. We're gonna pass this, but we're exempt from this and that. But I think one thing people should be aware of is when they see Agenda 21 staring them at the face, and they say, we don't want Agenda 21, is they go ahead and they're like, well, that's okay. We're just going to roll some of the things little by little in other bills, which is like the healthcare bill. People might not realize, but RFID chips are now approved. I have an article that said Obamacare approved RFID chips. They're no longer a myth. RFID chips will be implanted into patients. H.R. 3962 Obamacare bill actually approves RFID implants. Page 1505, the data claims for health records and any other data the Secretary deems necessary. This refers to the RFID chips used for patients' healthcare records. They left the bill open to where the Secretary can decide to add more and other information to be implanted on the RFID chips. So it's not just the land. It's also we're going to stick chips in people as well, right? So they're going to track us as well as take our land away.
Right. And the other part of this, the other aspect of this, is this bill is really designed for profiteering. Not only for concentrating the populace into city areas where they can be as serfs, basically slaves in very small units. But this bill is being promoted as an environmental bill to protect against ozone depletion and protect the environment. And it's used to back up a cap and trade industry. And Hal, what do you know about the cap and trade industry?
Well, as we talked about, the cap and trade, the EPA has power to enforce, homeowners to rebuild their homes in under their regulations. It's a bill that Obama is really trying to push through.
So have you heard about the Chicago Climate Exchange Board? The Chicago Climate Exchange was established in 2003, and it's North America's largest and longest running greenhouse gas emission reduction program. So, the way cap and trade works, a government sets a cap on an industry, and then they decide how much pollution is going to be allowed by that industry. And let's just put a number on it. Let's just say 100 microns or something. And say your company, Hal, they said, okay, well, you can produce 100 microns of pollution or whatever. Now, and Kenny's company also can produce 100 microns. However, Your company is producing 130 microns, but Kenny's company is producing 60 microns. He has a surplus. He can sell his microns to you through the climate exchange, and they profit by it. In fact, they'll make $11 trillion in 1 year by selling carbon emissions. And the problem with the cap and trade, it's based on a fiction. It's not real. It originally was attempted to be sold as a way to combat global warming. But the scientists were saying, wait a minute, there is no global warming. In fact, the climate is cooling. So then that morphed into what's called climate, forget the word. It'll come to me. Climate change. So the climate is always changing. So since the climate is always changing, there would be no end to this profiteering. Because if it were actually a global warming situation, maybe there would be an end to it. Maybe at some point you would say, okay, well, now we've cooled down the globe, but now it's climate change. So, and of course the climate is always changing, so there'll always be a need for you to pay him because of your emissions.
Well, certainly Americans should be protected against cow emissions. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, those emissions that they claim that the cows produce are nowhere near the emissions from swamps or underground areas in the ocean.
Well, there you go. The profiteering is endless, because if someone has a swamp, you can charge them for the swamp emissions.
Right. So it's profiteering. That's what they're going to do. So they've changed. They've taken the environment and used it as a way to both control the population and to make money. Big money. And cap and trade, carbon tax, and they sell it to the public as a way to protect the environment. And the public is going to end up hurting themselves. And then future generations will say, well, it's normal to live in a stack and pack. It's normal to live in a 20 by, well, actually it's 10 feet by 30 feet. Basically the size of a trailer.
Yeah, their goal is to make people slowly but surely believe it's right. And if they keep on leading it along slowly, they think they're going to get everybody to agree with it. I still believe they're going to have a hard time convincing people of that. Especially since the people that are trying to tell you this are not going to live that way. Obama's not living in a 30-foot by 10-foot shack.
Right. But they'll be making exceptions. And certainly the wealthy elite, the top 1%, they're not going to be living like this, but the rest of us are. And by the way, that 10-foot or 10-foot by 30-foot area would be the biggest snack and pack they have. There would be smaller ones too. And under New York law, that would have been considered 10 years ago, or less than that, until very recently, it would be considered uninhabitable and against their city ordinances. However, Mayor Bloomberg has waived that. So now he's built thousands of these stack and packs. And what the problem I have is that future generations, it'd be like the frog in the pot. of water, which is cool, and then heated up slowly, and so the frog stays in the pot. And I see that this is going to be a problem with future generations. They won't be able to conceive of living in the suburbs. There will be no suburbs for them to live in. And what are the ramifications for future generations, Kenny? What does this mean for them?
I believe it's all about power. They're trying to control, I think, the economy. I think a lot of it probably comes down to the money. If they can control you, then they can decide anything for you.
This is clearly a socialist document. Clearly, by their own writings. How do they get away with it, Hal?
Well, I know how they get away with it. It starts in the classroom with young kids, and you put in the school books that this environment's in trouble, there's climate change, and you indoctrinate the kids, and so they think, oh, well, we have to do something about this. So the kids, as they grow older, they willingly go along with these agendas because they think it's good. That's because they were indoctrinated to believe so.
I think you're right, and I think they've done that with religion in the classroom, and taking that out of the classroom is they teach the kids, they control the books, and then everybody thinks it's normal to worry about sustainability. It's normal to think that having a golf course is not sustainable, having a ski area is not sustainable, having pasture land and grazeland is not sustainable. That's a normal thing.
What Hal just mentioned, I have to read an article about the Obama administration. There was a lady in his administration, Carol Browner. She had to leave her post or her government position because it was discovered that through the Obama administration she lied and published misleading information to the public. She was a leader in the Socialist Commission for a Sustainable World Society, meaning she supported Agenda 21. She had to step down from her position because of what I just read. She was caught in many lies. She was giving out misleading information to the public, which it's different than what Hal mentioned, but that's what they try to do. If they can mislead the public, then they're going to get people on their side, but without those people having the facts. That's what socialism is.
So what can we do? Oh, by the way, I just wanted to point this out. The public is going to be affected very quickly, and one reason is because they actually put it on your electric bill. It's a climate action plan, and they'll charge customers a certain number of cents per kilowatt hour.
Smart meter
For the environment. And they've done it in Boulder, Colorado, November 2006. And they can use those funds to implement an agenda that really hurts the citizens. How do we stop this, Hal?
Well, I think the people have just got to be educated, like this show. People have got to wake up and band together. But I think the only way to nip it in the butt is through the state level. I don't think that going through the federal level is going to help at all because, again, they do whatever they want to do. It's just like the bailouts. Whatever they decide to do, and they just ignore everybody, and they let people go in there and tell them this and that, but they just don't listen. So the states have got to take control. The people have got to get together with their communities and their states and take back this country.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think the bailout is just almost a perfect point about that. So when 98% of the people, including me, who called down, and I called my congressman, my U.S. congressman, and he left messages not to vote for this, and the bailout. I even called the the Vermont congressman who was kind of holding it up to vote against it. But nonetheless, they voted for it anyway. And they were threatened. Some of them say that they were threatened they had to. But I don't think that was the answer. And so I'm really beginning to think that you're right. The federal government and the Congress, they won't do anything to stop the illegal activities. For example, this is not law. This is being implemented without the consent of Congress.
So you believe there's possible buyouts? What's the fear?
What's the fear? This is a takeover. The Constitution is being contravened. What happened to Article 2 of the Constitution? What happened to the consent? The federal government is not working. We have had multiple military actions, but the last time war was declared was in 1942. There was no war declared in Vietnam. There was no war declared in Iraq. There
was no war declared in the Persian Gulf either.
Right. So if Congress, who are supposed to be acting according to the will of the people, aren't doing their job and not resisting this and things like that, where do we get any protection? And the states are probably our best shot. And the reason is the states are right here. I can call my state rep, and I can call my state senator, and those guys are answerable to us. So the states, we can go to Beacon Hill.
I've actually, it's interesting. I wrote to a state senator, won't say the name, but I mentioned this, and they were not interested in hearing my concerns.
I think it's the only chance we have is through state governments. In Alabama, I know, is a state that resisted it. I know that.
Arizona is always butting heads.
Arizona is also. So we have to get the states on board, because the federal government is not helping us at all. They're not answering to us. They're not answering to the laws that are in place via the Constitution, ignoring the Constitution. And the framers of the Constitution knew a central government would be a problem.
Well, I would say that the federal government is treasonous because they deal with the UN.
It's a good example. We have the Constitution says that Article 4 of the United States Constitution provides the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. It's in the U.S. Constitution. This is not a republican form of government. These agencies don't listen to us at all. So I think we have a real problem in this country, and I really would like everybody out there, Google Agenda 21. Read the sections for yourself. They attempt to sell this to you as a way to help people, as a way to protect the environment. In each of these sections, they'll say, oh, this is to help women, this is to help the poor. This is a international takeover.
Right.
So I agree with you, Hal. I think the states are probably the best chance we have.
Well, I'd like to bring up one more incident that happened. Some people are probably familiar with the Delta smelt minnow. In California, what happened was the Central Valley, it's a 500-mile stretch of land dominating the central portion of California. provides over 50% of America's vegetables, fruits, and nuts, has its water source cut back up to 90% in the farming areas. The reason was for this delta smelt minnow. So the water crucial for farming has been reverted back to the Pacific Ocean during a drought. The federal government justified this because of the delta smelt. They didn't want it to die, so they redirected the water to sustain these minnows. So that cut off the water supply for the farms that produced 50% of America's vegetables. So, and the federal government just went and did it on their own. So so nearly half of all water in California is allotted over federal projects. So again, there's the federal government stepping in and taking control.
And I also, we did say this, referred to this in our last show. The federal government is so expansive. The agency, the states like Massachusetts, they have an annual budget of $24 billion, thereabouts. $24 billion. That is peanuts to the federal government. They can roll in, do whatever they want. We pay taxes to the federal government, which they give back to the states via highway money, if the states do what the federal government wants and implements the legislation that the federal government wants. So if the federal government wants uniform legislation across the country, then they can do that by saying, you're getting no highway money unless you implement this federal plan. So eventually you're eroding the powers of the individual states to create their own laws based on their own values, based on their own needs, in implementing a uniform law. It's an excellent point, and thanks for bringing that up. I'd like to really emphasize the problem that I see that we have is we have a federal government that is not responding to our needs. And under the Constitution, they're supposed to be. Something's broken. They're not responding to the requirements of the Constitution. What the Constitution says has to be done. The Congress doesn't declare war anymore. War takes place all over the place by executive action and executive order. There are no restraints in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, I see the only support that we can get is with the state government. And because they are close to home, they are local, and they are answerable, accountable to us to some degree. We can go to Boston and speak to our senators and speak to our reps and say this is what we want to see happen. Doesn't mean that's how it's going to happen, but at least they have to shake our hand, they have to see us, they have to answer their calls if they want the job. It doesn't happen in Washington. And so this is a real problem. And I want to thank you both for coming today, and we covered an awful lot of material, and there's a lot more material out there that we didn't even get to. But I'd really encourage everyone to go to Google the Agenda 21 document. It's 300 pages. Look for these sections. See what they're trying to do. And you're going to see for yourself that this is a nefarious project and it's going to hurt us. Thank you very much.